we can go ahead and get started. My name is Nick Miller. I'm the Executive Director at the Venture College. And if you've been tuning into these, you'll see that my background has changed because I am actually at the Venture College and not in my basement any longer. So it's a welcome change. And that return to work and then the return home, which I think is a game we're all going to be playing over the months at least to come, is our topic for today. We're really excited to welcome Erick Herring with VYNYL. Erick is the CTO at VYNYL, and he's going to talk today about modernizing your IT operations, the promise of digital transformation. And I think just as an introduction both to today's talk and what we've been doing over the past several months with Survive to Thrive, we have really tried to focus on recreating the community that exists in Boise around startups and innovators, and obviously partnering with Trailhead has made a huge difference for us at the Venture College, and just in general to be able to connect to the community that Trailhead has. And I'd also like to just point out, Erick being with VYNYL, VYNYL is probably the most active startup in our community when it comes to building community and building bridges across industries, across universities, across really all levels of education. The team at VYNYL is just super involved in Boise's startup community and committed to it. And if you go to any events, virtual or otherwise, you'll see them. You'll see their company name, and that's for a good reason. It's because they give first, and they really exemplify what I think makes this community such a great place. So enough adulation for VYNYL. At least for this portion of the talk, but really excited to have Erick here with us today. And I'll toss it over to TM to kick us off.
Thanks, Nick. And yeah, welcome to the show, Erick.
Thanks for having me.
I'm personally pretty excited about today's topic. It's a rather technical one, especially when you compare it to some of the other topics that we've covered. And that's what gets me actually excited about this. It's very relevant. Digital transformations are getting renewed attention. Let's put it that way. The concept of modernization or digital transformation, the concepts have been around for some time. I mean, the interwebs has been with us for quite some time now, but they're getting, like I said, a lot of attention now, especially as private and public organizations are responding to the pandemic and reassessing their internal and external workflows. So very relevant topic. I myself have been talking to other nonprofits and private organizations about this recently. And so I'm really excited to get you to ourselves, Erick, for the session. And I joked on LinkedIn, I said, I'm basically getting a free hour of consultation and I'm passing it on to you being the community. And so today I want to talk to you about really what are digital transformations? Let's kind of wrap our head around it. And then let's talk about the various ways digital transformations take shape within organizations and what organizations can do. And then lastly, I want to end on some key takeaways. But before we dive in, Erick, and I have some questions prepared for you. Give us just a little background on yourself, and so our audience has a chance to get to know you a little bit. And tell us just a little bit about VYNYL and your role there, and that will then kick us off to the Q&A part.
For sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the great intro, Nick. Really appreciate it. We love being part of the community. So my name is Erick Herring. I am the Chief Technology Officer at VYNYL. We are a product development firm. There's lots of different varieties of such firms. We really focus on and like to work with clients that have a deeper need than just writing a piece of software. Not that we don't do that. We also love writing software, but what really gets us going is talking to businesses about how they create value and helping them to create that value, and understanding their customers and addressing the entire product life cycle and not just the bits and bytes. Which is maybe a funny thing for the chief technology officer to say, but you know, it is what it is. That's our sweet spot. Myself, I've been fortunate enough to never really have had any other jobs in my life that weren't technology related. I've been writing software since I was a kid, honestly, and it's been incredibly fulfilling. I got to see the birth of the commercial internet. And was on the internet before the commercial internet, when it was still the NSF net, and even for a hot minute when it was ARPANET. Excuse me. Got to see the birth of the World Wide Web. Really had a front row seat to that in a lot of ways. I was in charge of Scandinavia for Next Computer back in the day. And one day, this is one of my favorite stories, one day we got some floppy disks in the mail along with our monthly newsletter, telling us about all the things that happened in the world of Next Computer. And one of the floppy disks said worldwideweb.app. And then it said copyright CERN. And we put it in, trying to figure out what it was. And it was the first web browser and the first web server. Back then you could edit the pages directly in the browser, and lots of stuff that went away as soon as Netscape got involved. But I got to say, that was, I think, 1992, and I've been writing web pages and web applications in one form or another ever since. So anyway, the point of all my rambling is that I've been incredibly fortunate to be at some of these turning points and see it all evolve from scratch in some sense. And I've always felt very lucky to have that vantage.
So Eric, given your incredible background, I mean, look, you have deep domain expertise in this topic, and I'm going to try my best at keeping this high level and as technical as needed. You already dropped some acronyms that on the side I'm Googling on my phone and what they mean. It kind of tells you also how old I am. But let's start then. Let's get our head wrapped around at a really high level. Help us understand, what are digital transformations? When they take hold of an organization, as an employee, how do I experience it? As a customer, how do I experience it? What are we talking about here with digital transformations, Eric?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll apologize to everybody in advance. My cat, he's just off frame here. He's decided he's participating with me today. So there he is. If he gets in the frame, you'll just have to bear with me. So digital transformation is a big topic. It has its own Wikipedia page. All right, you were cute for a second. Now you have to go. There you go. All right. The Wikipedia page is very focused on the actual, nuts and bolts of the technology stuff. And it's definitely about, efficiency and automation and changing systems and processes to move towards, seamless digital experiences for stakeholders. But it's not only about that, right? One of the definitions is the integration of digital technology into all areas of a business. And that's pretty lofty, pretty ambitious, and I think it necessarily changes how you operate. I think you would have to operate differently, change your culture, embrace change, embrace a certain amount of failure, even, which is hard for a lot of organizations to internalize. I'll say failure in air quotes. But done well, digital transformation opens up the possibilities for new types of innovation, for creativity, rather than just making it possible to do what you're already doing, better or more efficiently. So I take a more expansive view of digital transformation. And you know, and the words modernization and digital transformation are in the title of the session today. And so, you know, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think there is a slight distinction to be drawn, you know, between those two things. You know, and I think in some sense they are, you know, one of them is a prerequisite and the other one is an end goal. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Digital transformation is a big topic.
So that said, you know, you mentioned a few things. I'm going to pick up on all of them that really got my attention here. But you know, we're talking beyond email and chat features, right? I mean, as an employee, you know, I might have gone from, you know, handwritten notes to email and then to, you know, my digital to-do list, and I have Slack at my disposal. But what you're saying is this is digital transformation from an organizational view is a much more deep-rooted and fundamental initiative. I mean, you mentioned culture, you mentioned people, process, and technology. Every time I hear people, process, and technology, it equals very complicated initiatives, right? Because you're including these various aspects of a business, and together they have to pull this thing off. So, you know, as I said, beyond email and chat features, let's talk about some examples. So if I'm a legacy company, meaning I've been around for some time, I have my infrastructure built, I'm set in my ways, I have potentially an ERP or a CRM system. How do I approach even thinking about digital transformation as an established legacy kind of business? So take me through sort of the thinking process from the point of view of the organization.
Sure. I guess like with most things, I would always encourage beginning with the end in mind. At the end of the day, any organization, whether it is a for-profit company or a government agency, nonprofit, has a mission, right? It has value that it needs to deliver to its stakeholders. And you have to work backwards from what that value is. And in some cases, what you want it to be when you're trying to innovate on the value that you're delivering. But, you know, leaving that aside for the moment, you have to look at what you actually do. What do you get paid for? You know, whether that's, you know, dollars that you get in you know, for goods and services that equate to profit, or whether that's, you know, budget that you get allocated for, you know, whatever. And I guess my point is, like, this works for public companies, it works for government agencies, it works for nonprofits, but it also works down at the scale of the independent business unit or autonomous department within a company, right? You can digitally transform at many levels. You know, not at all levels necessarily, and it's different from business to business, but it's possible to, you know, take the digital transformation bull by the horns, even if you're not the CEO or the CTO of a company, even if you're not anointed or appointed, right, to do so. And so you have to start at the end and work backwards from there, because at the end of the day, it's relatively unimportant what kind of database you have and how efficiently your stored procedures might be written if you have lost sight of the value that you're delivering to your customers.
So organizations really have to think about digital transformation in terms of value creation.
Absolutely.
That's different than what my knee jerk would have been if I were to interpret this. And this is why we're having this call. Good. So let me throw some buzzwords at you and please put them in context for me. So, you know, as an employee, I've been through Agile, I've been through cloud migrations. Are those part of digital transformation? Are they a prerequisite? Put those two that I happen to have experience with, put those two in context for us.
Sure. Those those two are both certainly, top of mind now while everybody is trying to move to the cloud. And if you're not, if you're not agile, you're not nothing. I will say that you go away. You edit that out, Tia. Agile methods have been, the new hotness for some time now. And in fact, I think there's probably a whole generation of technologists who don't know, except to derisively, refer to waterfall, which they've never actually experienced, or actually they probably have experienced, but they called it agile. Except for that, they don't know that there was any other way to do this, right? These methodologies are so pervasive that most people don't realize they're relatively new. 17 of the smartest thinkers in software development and systems operation got together in 2001, believe it or not, in early 2001, and they wrote a manifesto about this stuff. There was no Scrum, there was no Kanban at that time. There was a lot of different methodologies. I didn't go, mostly because I wasn't invited. But they wrote this manifesto, and the manifesto was super useful. It said some really interesting things, value individuals' interactions over processes and tools, right? It said customer collaboration is better than contract negotiation. And they didn't mean that contract negotiation wasn't important. They didn't mean that processes and tools weren't important. They simply meant that the things on the left-hand side were more important than the things on the right-hand side. And, I'm sure they drank a lot of beer, and this happened at a ski resort. I'm sure they drank a lot of beer and ate a lot of good meals over the couple of days they were together. And they ended up with this very brief manifesto. And so Scrum and Kanban take that 1,000 steps further, right? But the way they're implemented in most organizations strays pretty far away from the simple principles, the simple tenets of the manifesto, because not all organizations can be comfortable with echoing. Can't be comfortable with the messy, creative, orderly disorder of agile methods. Again, there has to be a certain comfort in not knowing the precise answer of what day something is going to launch, which is back to what I said earlier about being, somewhat comfortable with failure, and not all organizations should be comfortable with these things, right? Nuclear power, space flight, spring to mind, those might want to be a little bit more waterfall-y. And I will say, sorry, I'm monologuing a little bit. This is an interesting topic to me, so I hope I'm not using up too much airtime here, but most organizations focus on the efficiency aspects of agile. People either don't realize or have forgotten that Taiichi Ohno, who created these lean methodologies for Toyota, that when he was asked to share how Toyota was so successful, all he shared was the efficiency and cost-cutting aspects. He was intentionally leading us down a blind alley. He didn't tell us how Toyota was successful. He told us how Toyota became more efficient and increased flow and decreased costs. And it was genius because it gave us all something to do, right? We all came back and started making everything more efficient and cutting our costs. But what a business wants, what a business needs, is to be profitable. And to be profitable, you have to focus on your customers, and you have to give them what they need, give them what they want. That's how you become profitable. So I guess, don't get me wrong, like agile is an important part, and I'm not going to give you my cloud monologue, but it's also an important part, right? But these are tools, and they're tools that you deploy in the service of creating the value that is necessary. We're an agile shop, given our druthers, we run an agile process. And so, big lovers of cloud, big lovers of agile, but going into the cloud and turning on Scrum across your organization does not digitally transform you. I guess that's the kind of long story short.
Kind of building on that, and I think where you got was really practical advice, right? Of at the end of the day, you're building value for your customers, you're engaging with your customers, and that's the bottom line. To kind of keep it on that practical front, and you talk that you're an agile shop. Are there methodologies or tools that you have used at VYNYL or elsewhere that some of the folks listening here could leave this talk today and think, all right, I want to go learn more about X, and maybe it's just the top couple. I'm sure there's different systems and tools for a lot of different projects, but I would just be curious to learn more about the tools and methodologies that you've used, and then as a follow-up, any that have changed as you've become more of a remote digital shop as opposed to when everyone was working in person.
Right, got it. So, I mean, I guess I'll say that we use kind of the standard tool set. In our case, we use the Atlassian tools, Jira and whatnot, that I'm sure a lot of people on this call are familiar with. And those are great. In general, to conduct a robust agile process, you need a way to talk to each other. And the best way to do that is typically sitting around the table or whatever the remote equivalent of that is. In our case, it's Slack. Although Slack has its own drawbacks as far as tools go, because it demands so much attention if you don't know how to manage it properly. I've had on my to-do list for a while to write an internal user's manual for how to use Slack. And number one is going to be knowing when something is asynchronous versus when it needs a response right now, because it's easy to let it take over your life. But the same is true. The same is true of the water cooler in the in-person workplace, right? It's easy to fall into a conversation and then it's then another one and another one, and then it's lunchtime. But you need a way to talk to your colleagues, and you need a place to write things down. And so I guess I'm in general less focused on the specific tools than I am on recognizing that agile processes are embodied processes. They exist at a time and a place and have a fitness for purpose that is related to the structure of the organization you're deploying them in. And so I guess I want them to be engineering processes, but really they're more artisanal. They have a lot more to do with curating the way they're going to be used in a specific organization than they do with one size fits all, cookie cutter, use this tool. So as long as you have a way to talk to people and a place to write things down, preferably a ticket-based place to write things down so that you can, do the normal stuff that you want to do in software development. Then, I think you've got all the prerequisites, and everything else is down to collaboration and leadership, I think.
Eric, as we're talking about efficiencies and effectiveness, earlier you mentioned digital transformation really in the context of customer-centric thinking. And can you give us some example of non-efficiency digital transformations? I'm thinking of those who, might be customer-centric or outward bound. As a consumer, I used to experience it this way, and maybe through the digital transformation, I'm experiencing it another way. Can you think of some examples that can help sort of, again, put this into context for our listeners?
Sure. Although maybe I should clarify or maybe just sharpen the point I was making earlier. I guess what I would say now that you framed the question this way is that it's not that you don't get efficiency out of most or all of digital transformation. It's that when efficiency is the only goal, you don't realize you're leaving value on the table, right? And so the projects that we've been involved in most recently that obviously I don't know if it's obvious, but I'm not gonna talk in super specifics, simply because I don't have all the contracts memorized and I'm not sure what I should and shouldn't talk about. But the ones that we've enjoyed the most and feel like have brought the most value to the clients that we've been collaborating with, have really been about fundamentally reimagining the user experience. And does yes, that's your computer, does that bring efficiency when you reimagine the user interaction, when you give them new and better channels to interact with you, when you take them away from the call center and into, say, a delightful mobile experience? Yeah, of course, that brings it brings efficiency, but the efficiency is a happy byproduct. It's not the point, right? In just a second, I'm going to make you ask your question again, because I started rambling and I probably lost track of the actual exact question. But I will say that that when you find yourself focusing on efficiency in the context of modernization, only efficiency in the context of modernization or digital transformation, that it's probably healthy to take a step back and try and look at your organization from the outside in, because that's how the profit flows, right? Back to the assembly line, let's not do an assembly line. Let's do a freeway, right? Like, what's the best freeway? Well, the best freeway is where the cars are lined up front to back all along the freeway. It's completely full and they're moving at some number of miles per hour. And, hopefully nobody ever brakes or anything else, right? If you owned that freeway, then that's what you would want, right? You'd want maximum utilization, maximum efficiency, but nobody wants to drive on that freeway, right? Nobody who's actually in those cars, who in this metaphor are the customers, right? They don't want to drive on that freeway. And so when you find yourself focusing solely on efficiency or mostly on efficiency, I think you got to step away and look at the customer view.
Yeah, as I asked that question, as I listen to you as a consumer, and I keep putting on that consumer hat, just really seeking to understand more than anything with these questions. Blockbuster and Netflix come to mind. Blockbuster was the in-person brick and mortar, and that's where I got movies and video games. And so, Netflix obviously asked them, or I don't know if it's obvious, but Netflix must have asked themselves those very questions that you're talking about. How do people want to consume, media? And they've arrived at a question that the answer is that they want to do it digitally from the comfort of their home. And so, from an organizational point of view, the Blockbuster, do you think they didn't think about it? Do you think they didn't ask themselves the right questions? And what I'm getting at here is, if there are organizations out there that are now thinking, is digital transformation something I should be considering? Help us understand maybe that example between Netflix and Blockbuster, and knowing that you didn't work for either of them, or at least assuming, what are some of the assumptions going in this competitive, because it's a very easy example to make because most of us have experienced that.
For sure. So I'm certain that people at Blockbuster thought about this. I'm certain that people at Blockbuster saw this coming. But it was nobody's job at Blockbuster to make sure that their lunch didn't get eaten by Netflix. It was nobody's job at Blockbuster to make sure that they had a strategy that took the, incredibly fast transition to online into account. it was somebody's job to make sure the tapes got rewound, right? It was somebody's job to make sure that the packages of microwave popcorn got to the place and were purchased at the right price, and all of that, right? And so in a sense, Blockbuster never had a chance. This is the innovator's dilemma. And so could they have created an innovation lab and digitally transformed themselves? I mean, I would argue that had they done that, they probably just would have become Netflix. They probably would have actually been better off turning around and investing their profits in Netflix stock, and riding off into the sunset at whatever pace the sunset was going to come for them, right? Startups, in a lot of respects, are, kind of innovation or digital transformation, in the wild, red of tooth and claw, right? Like that's all they do. They bring change. And for entrenched players that are having that change, put on them, it probably seems pretty drastic. But the people inside these startups are doing the same thing that somebody internal to an organization might do, probably in a more gentle, more gradual manner, if the organization was forward-looking enough to embrace it.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Let's talk about that. That's an interesting point. So, an entrenched organization, and we can move away from the Blockbuster example. So if I am an entrenched organization and it's nobody's job to think about digital transformations or to ask the questions around value creation and digital transformation, let's talk about the mechanics. How do I go about even starting that conversation internally if I don't have anyone whose job it is, to your point?
Well, so in my experience, and so what I'm going to say now, I think is venturing more into kind of my personal views territory as opposed to anything I would hold out as, necessarily universal truth, just to be crystal clear. But I think there's probably two ways that this can happen. One, somebody in the organization who has, the requisite influence or power says, things around here have to change. And they find somebody to lead the effort, or they come and talk to a firm like VYNYL, and they create a digital, transformation initiative. The other way it happens is somebody internally says, there must be a better way. If we don't change something, if I don't change something, nothing is ever going to change. And that latter case, I feel like in a lot of senses, is the most interesting one. One of our most recent, brushes with digital transformation, that was absolutely the case. We had an incredibly passionate, incredibly talented, person on the inside who just decided that the organization, a big old organization, that they were going to change, and they made it happen. They built the support they needed, and toughed it out. And the ultimate outcome of that is still unknown because it wasn't top down, but great strides were made. And we got to be part of that, a small part of it, right? In this case, we weren't leading it, but we were happy followers in that sense, and provided all value where we were asked to. And that was a pretty terrific experience, I think. So
as Eric,
those are the two ways it happens.
As you describe those two ways, so a couple of things come to mind. So you're really describing, let's put the actual digital transformations, just park it for a moment. This is leading change. I mean, you're talking about, change management, change initiatives. Let's talk about this person who comes up with, the realization that, hey, if I don't change something, we might not have lunch to eat tomorrow. But, it starts with that person, but then how does it work in the organization? Like, who are the stakeholders? Again, you said people, process, technology. It just means it could have, wide-ranging implications to various departments. Like, who should own, ideally, lead the process internally, and what all levels of the organizations are typically affected and or involved?
So I'm not sure that I'm not sure there is a specific right owner for any of this stuff. The easy answer would be to say the CEO or the COO should own it. But that implies a top-down approach and kind of an organizational push towards change. And that's great. Like, that is a powerful way for this to happen. Somebody in the C-suite to decide that that's going to happen. Just as often it happens the other way, though, right? It happens because a department or a person or a group of people just decides that they're going to make things better. And I don't know that I prefer the one over the other. I will say, as a service provider, it's probably easier to be engaged by, the boss and, run such a process. And we certainly have been in that situation. But I'm not sure, you can look at it a priori and decide that one way is better or more, destined to be more successful than the other, I guess is what I'll say. I'm not sure there's one right answer here.
I gotcha. So let's take it a different way. So let's take VYNYL in this case, when you do engage with customers around digital transformations, sort of break down for us, like, where do you start? Are there phases to this? Are there specific artifacts that are derived from this process that then help your customer? Help us understand that better.
Sure. So you have to start by building a base of detailed understanding about what you have. The situation I'm addressing now is, we have decided that we are going to modernize and or digitally transform our business, right? And VYNYL has been asked to help. Is that a fair way to answer your question?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you build this detailed base of understanding of the current situation. You have to look at the people, the processes, the systems. You have to clearly document what you've got, right? And then you've got to try and envision what the steps are to get to the desired future state. That implies that there is a desired future state, right? That implies that you know where it is you want to go. And I'll say, at the risk of having too many sayings, it's important to remember that the map is important, but the map is also not the terrain, right? So yes, you have to have a plan. Yes, you have to have a map. You have to know where you are. You have to know where you're going, but you also have to create the situation, in the day-to-day that lets you navigate from point A to point B. So, if we just talk about each of the components, and I actually wish I had a whiteboard now. Maybe if we put a transcript of this up, maybe we'll put some diagrams in it. But imagine a box, right? It's people, process, technology, stakeholders on the sides. And those things, when they come together, bound your ability to innovate. They bound your ability to execute your strategy, and to innovate. And so if you take those things one at a time, right, you've got systems. So you might want to update them. You might want to replace them. For processes, you might want to streamline them. Or maybe they're just unaligned, and so you want to align them more closely with the organizational mission. You might want to make wholesale change in your processes, right? Along the lines of replacing the systems. And for people, you need to decide how you want to bring them along. The continuum on that spans from, doing nothing which is what happens in a lot of large organizations, certainly for a large percentage of the people. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. No value judgment. If you can afford it, doing nothing is sometimes the absolutely most humane, least wave causing thing to do in a larger organization. But it goes through, the continuum goes from doing nothing through really aggressive retraining, all the way through to replacing or outsourcing the existing people. And so you've got to, these are people we're talking about, and so you've got to be very mindful of the consequences. You've got to really think that through, and you've got to have a really robust plan. And that's why I say bringing them along, because I hope that's everybody's first impulse, is to figure out a way to bring the people along that are already there. It's certainly my first impulse. But that doesn't mean they're all going to make it through, especially if you're making major change to your processes, or, replacing legacy systems that, Bob is the only specialist in. Once that system is gone, then Bob's got to decide he wants to learn something besides COBOL.
So Eric, you touched on this a little bit earlier. You talked about culture, and it sounds like you've had the maybe the luck, call that good or bad, to be part of a process that is both grassroots and top down. In terms of objections or hurdles or barriers that are thrown up within an organization that you've seen, what are some of the more common objections or arguments against undergoing a digital transformation? And then how do you, as the third-party expert who's advising, how do you formulate arguments against them? And obviously everyone's case is somewhat unique, but what are some of the more common thoughts that you've seen, and how have you convinced them otherwise?
So that's a super interesting question, because it turns out that you almost never have those conversations. You would think you would, right? You'd think you would have a principled discussion about this stuff, and then you'd go around the table and you'd get a thumbs up or a thumbs down or whatever that is. But that almost never happens. What actually happens in these organizations is you end up with the pocket veto, right? By which I mean people just decide they're not going to do it, and then they don't. And the way they don't do it, a lot of times, especially in more established organizations, the way that they don't cooperate is by cooperating. They show up to the meetings, they take the tasks, they report back on progress, but in truth, they are not pulling in the same direction. That's not everybody, obviously. I'm not trying to vilify or paint a bad picture. It's human nature. Change is hard. I will say that we treat these things like due diligence. That there's a lot of commonalities between mergers and acquisitions due diligence when you're looking at whether you should acquire a piece of technology and coming into an organization trying to make change. And so the thing I will say directly to your question is, it's important to figure out how to staff certain aspects of the digital transformation or modernization efforts separately. Not only because you might have people exercising a pocket veto, but also because they have day jobs, And so at least at a leadership level, at something, at or just below the C-suite, the VP level in a traditional company. And then at the project management layer, you have to have a set of people, either, from your internal staff that are repurposed or brought in from the outside, who own the transformation, who own the success of the transformation. Does that make sense? Somebody's got to own the future state, because right now, everybody who works for you owns the current state. And that's how they're praised or not. That's how they are bonused or not, is whether they adequately execute the existing mission with the existing processes on the existing systems. And so somebody has to own that future state. It's incredibly rewarding, but it's also tough it's also tough as you're going through it, because you're spending every day, all day, convincing people that there's a better way, when it's not always clear that to the people you're talking to, at least, that that's true. Does that make sense?
So Eric, on that note, back to your point earlier, the role of startups and all of this. We've talked about entrenched organizations coming to the realization that they need to change. Most likely that's 50-50. Some will never come to that conclusion. And so what role do startups play in this? You said they bring innovation and it's sort of from the outside in. I'm thinking of, building a startup and an acquisition may happen. If I'm an entrepreneur, if I'm a startup and I'm trying to disrupt, for lack of a better word, the current state, as you put it, do SaaS companies, is that basically what they do?
Well, so we talked about this a little bit, so I think I know where you're going with this. So I'll talk about the spreadsheets.
Yeah, tell me about the spreadsheets.
Yeah.
I love spreadsheets, Eric.
So when TM and I were talking about this, I have no idea where I stole this idea from. I'm only confident that I didn't come up with this myself. But somebody somewhere said that if you want to build a successful startup, find the spreadsheet inside of a business or an industry that runs everything and replace it with a piece of SaaS software, and then sell subscriptions to it. Because nobody wants to think that their business is run by a spreadsheet, and nobody wants to be nobody wants to be subject to Sally who owns the spreadsheet. Right? They would rather have a per seat subscription to your SaaS. And so if you can find the spreadsheet and you can put a good UI on it, and you can make it compliant with regulations and respect GDPR and all that good stuff, then you're well on your way to creating a startup that people want to pay for. Absolutely. And I do think that that's what most successful startups do. Even if you have to do some violence to the metaphors, right? Like Slack, in important respects, replaced aspects of email. It didn't replace all of email. It didn't aim to replace all of email, but there was a niche that nobody knew existed, a use of email that was, more appropriate to a messaging format. So I personally don't think that Slack replaced instant messengers. I think if Slack had replaced instant messengers, I believe that we would have, before Slack showed up, we would have seen lots of instant messengers in the workplace. And the truth is we didn't see any of that. Not just because the security department shut that down hard, right? But for lots of other reasons. Somehow Slack saw this niche and they went into it. Ditto for any SaaS offering that helps you, for example, do your marketing, or helps you, see how successful your website is being, or that helps you with some logistical thing. And there's still lots of headroom there for the people who are thinking about, looking for an entrepreneurial idea. There's lots of spreadsheets that still need to be automated.
Yes, someone over at Todoist must have gotten wind of my spreadsheet, my action tracker, and they replaced my spreadsheet with a pretty beautiful UX, and it's form fields. I get to fill in the blank. I do very little thinking and just mostly doing, which, back to your point, that's what the consumer wanted, which was me in that case.
Yep.
So look, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure you distill this down to a couple of key takeaways. And then if there was anything you still wanted to, if there was any question I didn't ask you, Eric, and you feel like it's relevant to digital transformations, now would be a good time to talk about that. But, as I listen to you, from the organization's point of view, a couple of key takeaways was that really a digital transformation has to be tethered to a strategic plan. There's also the question of, do you have the people in-house to do this, or do you outsource it, or is there a blend of the two? So why don't we talk about that a little bit? Because, you know, as I understand, as VYNYL works with customers and other firms in this space, you may encounter a situation where the entrenched company has zero resources and zero, you know, domain expertise. And it can go all the way to, you know, a company that's, you know, just as well versed in these methods as a VYNYL, but they don't have the capacity to execute. So how as an organization, if I were to partner with an outsourced partner here, you know, help me figure out this make-buy decision. Do I hire? Do I bring them on? Do I bring on a partner with the intent to hire? What are some of the good strategies that you've seen your clients implement?
So please make sure that I answer the question. But before I dive into answering that question, I want to make one thing like super duper clear for anybody who, you know, might be thinking about initiating or you know, in some other way helping to lead such an initiative. You can hire the doing, but you can't hire the vision. You can hire someone, you know, someone like VYNYL. You can hire us to come in and help facilitate the creation of the vision, but the vision has got to come from leadership. You can't buy digital transformation off the shelf. You can buy piece parts of it, and you can buy lots of, you know, elbow grease to get it done. But at the end of the day, leadership has to articulate a vision for the future. You know, and again, you know, doesn't have to be, you know, high flying prose and manifestos, and we can absolutely set up a workshop and kind of work through, you know, after looking at the current state and looking at the different architectural properties of the technology systems and the way the people work together, the way the organization is constructed. You know, we can absolutely then run a workshop and create a vision, right? You don't have to create it from whole cloth as a leader. You certainly, you know, certainly that's a way to do it. And it's fine. But you do have to own it. The other thing I'll say is that once you do have that vision, then you can start to sketch out the steps and you can start staffing the steps, right? And that's where recruiting internally or finding a company like VYNYL to partner with can really help you, because the steps, you know, they're mini projects in and of themselves. You do a thing, you have a result. The one thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, I'm just looking at my note here, and I didn't get into it earlier. You know, some people on this call might be aware of a thing called Conway's Law. Mel Conway, back in the day, he said, roughly, I'm not going to quote him directly, but he basically said, whatever software you build is going to look exactly like your organization is organized, right? So, you know, somebody else said, if you have 3 departments, you're going to have 3 sections on your website, right? And you know, that might be the right answer, right? You might want 3 sections on your website, but your customers might not view you as having 3 departments. Your customers might view you as a single thing. So you're just confusing them by showing them your insights, right? And so one of the things that I find most useful, the reason I wanted to set that context, one of the things I find most useful as you're going through these digital transformation processes and even modernization processes that fall, you know, that don't go all the way towards digital transformation, is that, you know, again, you start with the end in mind. Somebody called it the inverse Conway maneuver. So basically, you, as part of the transformation, you change the organization so that it more closely resembles the systems you want to show the world, right? You change the structure and the way you're organized, the way your processes flow, the way the end-to-end flows, in such a way that the end product is more along the lines of what you want. And that way you're working at it from both ends, right? You're articulating what you want as the result, but you're also changing the organization so that it's more likely to create that result. And it all comes together there in the middle. And so I think that that's an important thing to remember, right? You can't, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting, right? If you want something different, you got to do something different. I think at this point I might be quoting Steve Covey.
The tools and methodologies that got you to where you are now are not necessarily the same that can get you through, or can get you through a successful digital transformation. You need a kind of a paradigm shift in the way you look at even home business.
100%, 100%. So I think I maybe didn't answer your question, but I answered part of it.
I'll take it.
All right.
All right, and we're about out of time, so let me turn it back to Nick. He's going to help us close out and take us home.
Yeah, well, first, Eric, thank you. That was super interesting, and I think we all walked away with some valuable ideas and tips, at the very least, to get started. But then, as we want to ramp up our efforts to transform digitally, we know where to go, and we'll be posting Erick's home address and phone number in the chat afterwards, so you know where to find him. But we know where to find VYNYL. Up on Bank Drive behind Wells Fargo, and in a variety of other places, as we mentioned before. But just appreciate you making time, sharing your expertise and knowledge with the community.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we have been doing these every couple of weeks. And speaking of expertise and knowledge, we are. Well, TM, you could probably tell us we're, to the day, how many days we're out from Boise Startup Week.
Yeah, I count them in hours.
Right. Hours, minutes, seconds. But what we're planning on doing over the next few Survive to Thrive sessions is taking the opportunity to preview some of what is coming down the pike for Boise Startup Week. Featuring different track leaders, different folks that we have on this call, TM, Nick Krabs, Eric, I know you're really involved as well. But that event, Boise Startup Week, is one of the, if not the flagship event for our startup community every year. And we want to make sure that as that event moves to a virtual setting with the theme of Be Resilient, that we're making people aware of what's happening that last week in October, the 26th through the 30th. And if we can't all be together in person at Trailhead and elsewhere, we're really excited to have the opportunity to be together virtually and hear some pretty amazing talks. And I've had the chance to be involved in some of the planning, and I can tell you firsthand, there are some really amazing talks and events that'll be happening that week. So be on the lookout for the next session of Survive to Thrive in 2 weeks, where we'll be hosting some of the Boise Startup Week leaders, and we will see you then.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.